Accurately cutting pattern pieces starts with properly pinning these pattern pieces to fabric. In the sewing process, you'll find yourself in various situations. What you need to remember is that regardless of the type of patterns you're working with or whether they require to be cut on fold or not, correctly pinning the patterns to fabric is essential. If you are a sewing beginner, pinning and cutting your patterns may be giving you some anxiety. The truth is, I personally enjoy the sewing process more than the pattern cutting process, but I can't deny that a sewing pattern that is correctly and stably pinned to fabric can actually be fun to cut out, sort of like a big stencil cutting project. There are 3 things I do want you to always remember. Always align and pin your grain lines first. When possible, pin along the pattern edges within the seam allowance. Try to use the best pins for the fabric at hand. You will learn everything you need to know about these 3 rules in today's tutorial. After it has been correctly aligned according to grain line and the fabric salvage edge, the pattern is pinned to the fabric layers in preparation for cutting. When working with full patterns, the first thing that should be aligned and pinned is the grain line. Remember, the grain line is always perfectly parallel to the fabric salvage edge. Keep in mind that pattern pieces should be aligned as close as possible to each other, making sure their grain lines are perfectly parallel to the salvage edge regardless of where they are located on the fabric. If your patterns are cut on fold style, fold the fabric such that the salvage edge is parallel to the fold and pin the pattern along the folded edge. After pinning down the grain line and fabric fold, smooth out the patterns towards the unpinned edges with your hand such that they lay completely flat against the fabric. Pin down corners, extensions, and pattern edges. Always pin sewing patterns along the edge, pinning through the seam allowance when possible. Inserting the pins vertically parallel to the pattern edges will keep the edges laying flatter and keep the pins directed comfortably for cutting. For thin, light, loosely woven, or slippery fabrics, insert pins closer together to achieve more control during the pattern cutting process. Pin less densely for structured, medium to heavy weight, and thick fabrics. While pinning along the pattern edges, the pins should not poke out from the pattern surface or they will get in the way of cutting the fabric right next to these edges. Insert additional pins along curved edges. Doing so will provide increased control when cutting next to these more difficult lines. Use thick, longer pins for heavier, thicker fabrics or when cutting multiple fabric layers. Use thinner, sharper pins, also called silk pins, for fine, thin, light fabrics like chiffons and various types of silk. There are 3 main styles of pins used in dressmaking. All head pins are pins that have a plastic or glass ball at the opposite end of the needle point. They are best to use in apparel as they provide the most comfort for handling and removing during machine stitching. All head pins are available in a variety of different thicknesses and lengths depending on the fabric or project at hand. T-shaped pins are used for pinning together loosely woven or high-pile fabrics. The T extension stops the pin from slipping through the fabric weave. It also increases the pin's visibility against highly textured 3-dimensional fabrics. Flat head pins are used mainly for draping on a dress form as they are shorter and blend into the seam much easier. Flat head pins are also used during the sewing process when a large number of pins is needed to secure small folds such as pleats or tucks.